Part 1, I realized how I was trying so hard to retain my cult persona. If you've ever read Stephen Hassan's works, he talks about the cult persona. He's a cult expert. I was trying to retain it or protect it or something like that. It was actually getting in my way of moving on with my life, which at a soul level is what I wanted. My cult persona really gets in the way in part 2. Watch for it. It was Mother's Day before I went out with Vince. Officially, it was our first date. He invited me to brunch at a nice restaurant built onto a renovated antique dining train car in downtown Saskatoon. I agreed on the condition that I could meet him there. We had been dancing together for about 4 months by this time. Vince arrived just as I did, and we laughed about our good timing as he escorted me inside. He must have made reservations because the waitress escorted us up the stairs and seated us in the farthest and quietest corner of the train car, then handed us menus. Thank goodness. There was no way I was going to the buffet. What if someone I knew saw me with a man who wasn't a brother? The waitress brought us coffee, and I nervously poured in some cream and stirred. I held the cup with 2 hands to steady myself too. God. Vince watched me closely and smiled happily, but me, I could barely talk. He sensed my nervousness and tried hard to set me at ease. We talked about dancing. I tried very hard to relax and enjoy myself. It was impossible. I reminded myself of Dr. Kat's words, breathe in, breathe out, and keep breathing. That's what she told me. When the food arrived, I was so anxious I could barely eat. I picked at it, eating slowly and carefully. I couldn't taste the food. I forced part of the meal down and left much of it on my plate. Somehow I made it through the date, and Vince drove me home. I thanked him, jumped out of his truck, and ran inside the safety of my apartment. I worried that he wouldn't call me. I was deeply embarrassed about my dreadful nervousness. I wanted to call my friend Gabby and tell her all about my first date. She told me all about hers. I thought about Tom and decided against it. Vince called the next evening, and I was so relieved. I apologized for my awful nervousness, and he said, "Oh, don't worry about that." He kind of understood what I was going through. He knew a little bit about my religious upbringing. Oh, I let him pick me up for all the dances after that. And we usually went out for dinner and then dancing. Sometimes he even picked me up at work, since it was closer to where he lived and easier to go instead of all across town and back. He lived on the east side and I was far west side of Saskatoon. By the fall of 1999, I was able to accept a permanent job in an office at Research Park after all those temp jobs. And they provided a living wage, and I was able to support myself and keep my apartment and my standard of living, which was nice. I liked Vince a lot. I wanted to spend time with him. I just needed to go slow, and this first date was a huge step for which I felt so unprepared. In spite of Dr. Kat's coaching, I wish she would have told me about the cult persona. I didn't know that until much later, but that would have been helpful because, you know, out of that, hey, this is my cult persona, how do I get out of that? Vince was very caring and gentle, and he invited me freely into his life, into his home. Vince was such a gentleman. He opened and closed doors for me. He treated me to meals, drinks. I liked that because he was open and honest with me. Treated me like a lady. That's always nice. That was more than I ever had with my husband. And it was way more than I ever got from the brothers at the meetings, who couldn't even work up the nerve to have a simple conversation, never mind ask me out on a date. Well, perhaps I need to stop talking about that. Because if someone were to ask me out from the congregation, I might have had to vomit. Vince offered me a ride to the Sunday night dance, which happened to be another Stetson swing dance. This time I accepted his gracious offer to pick me up as his date. My daughter, Monica, met Vince once. After she and Diane decided to move back to Vancouver, they evacuated their apartment downtown. They gave notice at their respective jobs, and Diane moved back to her home with her folks and until they could arrange to leave Saskatoon. Monica stayed with me for a month to save money. Vince came to pick me up for a Sunday afternoon dance lesson. As Monica studied him, I detected disapproval on her face, and of course I would. After all, Vince was not an approved brother. For the most part, Monica left me to my own devices. While she wanted what was best for me, she figured that it was in my best interest to stay within the safety of the congregation. Like me, that's all she ever knew. After all, that was what I taught her. I speculated that she might have phoned Sean to warn him there was a worldly man hanging around me. But it was unlikely, since Sean and Monica hated each other. They did their whole lives. Monica and Vince were civil to each other, and that's all I cared about. The weeks flew by quickly, and before I knew it, Monica and Diane were gone again to the West Coast, 2 provinces away. Soon afterwards, my son and his wife, Sean and Mabel, stopped by unannounced one Saturday afternoon. Monica must have reported me. Mabel produced some acrylic nail kits out of her shopping bag and suggested, "Let's do our nails together." Out of the blue. Great idea. I welcomed the opportunity. That was so out of the ordinary. She never did such a thing before. Invite me, her mother-in-law, to do our nails together, or anything together. They got married in 1997, the year of my divorce. Spring convention, they started dating. September was the wedding. All of 6 months. Anyway, back to 2000. Sean and Mabel asked about my dance lessons while we were doing our nails. I became suspicious. More suspicious. Are they fishing? But I was too happy to keep all the excitement to myself. I told them about all the dances I was learning. I showed them my dance shoes with the suede soles. They seemed a bit reserved, so I didn't say too much else except that I had planned to continue with the lessons. "I'm thoroughly enjoying them," I said. I dared not breathe a word about my dates with Vince. I'd be digging my own grave. It certainly intrigued Vince that I hadn't slept with anyone since my divorce, which was about 3 years past. Let's just say, Vince was quite willing to make eye contact with me. I was too afraid, though. The fear that was instilled in me from the years of being a witness ran so deep. Yet when Vince held my hand in his and gently stroked it, I yearned for more. He talked to me about his ex-wife and how their marriage broke up. We talked about our respective exes and our marriages. He talked about commitment to our relationship. He was a one-woman man and fully focused on devoting himself to me. And he really wanted me to be the lady in his life, to lavish attention on and to dance with. It just seemed so right. He had a lot to offer a lady. He had 2 grown children who were married and lived on their own. They were out of the house. I met them and they seemed nice. His big house was completely empty, and he wanted companionship. We're all humans. We all want that, don't we? Nothing wrong with that. He had a big yard, a garden space, and raspberry bushes that were loaded with berries nearing their fullness. I offered to help him do his gardening. That seemed like a good place to start to get to know Vince better. We went to the farmer's market and bought plants to grow a garden and spruce up the yard. We got some petunias and marigolds, peas and corn and tomatoes, and we had lots of fun planting them all. As Vince and I slowly grew closer over the months, I talked with Dr. Cat and began to shed some of the fear of getting involved with him. I gradually began to understand my attachment to this interesting new man in my life, and I struggled with all the guilt. I was not being faithful to my beliefs about sticking exclusively with members of the religion. Uh-oh. Cult persona alert. And once I got involved romantically, intimately with Vince, that guilt was magnified exponentially. I guessed the JW cult persona was still alive and well, even though I had been not gone to a meeting in months, many months. The thought of a meeting felt, well, icky. Ugh. Anyway, a few months after our affair began, I told Vince I loved him. Silence was his answer. He could not say those words back to me. Didn't Vince feel the same way about me that I felt about him? I grew terrified. I was such a fool. How could I have been so deceived? What was all the earlier talk about faithfulness and commitment and wanting a lady in his life? I was baffled. Maybe men and women have different ideas about relationships. I can't really explain it. A few tortured weeks went by. Finally, I couldn't bear my guilt-ridden existence any longer. I broke up with Vince. My cult persona called one of the elders I trusted and told him that I would like to talk over a problem I was having. He said he would get back to me. Within a few days, 3 elders showed up at my apartment. A judicial committee? Yikes. The elders were selected to make a judgment on the matter of my sin, about which I had not yet told them. When I phoned initially, the elder quickly drew the conclusion that I had sinned, and they wanted to establish fault or blame, so they came to investigate, unannounced. I revealed that I was dating a man, but recently I had pangs of conscience, so I broke it off. Well, after grilling me about all the details, they prescribed articles from the Watchtower about sexual immorality to read. It was as if they already knew all about me before I told them anything. Next, they quoted a scripture saying the angels were happy when one sinner repents, and then they prayed for me. I wanted comfort, and that did not feel like the kind of help I was seeking. Instead, I was betrayed by these elders. It was as if they had already prejudged me. Their foremost concern was not to help me. It was to keep the congregation clean of anything undesirable. Even as they were talking with me, it began to occur to me that perhaps they had been spying on me. Maybe they watched my parking spot to make sure if there was or wasn't a vehicle that would provide them with more clues. I made a huge mistake confiding in them. They weren't interested in me at all. At all. Oh. Vince and I remained broken up for about a month, but we just missed each other too much to stay apart. I missed the dancing too. Then one day, Vince dropped by unexpectedly and extended a dozen roses. And he explained, "I'm sorry for my silence, Esther. I love that you love me. It didn't take me very long to figure out that I love you too." Those words broke down any reserve I had about what I was doing, especially after missing him like I did. I reached out for the roses, and a tear ran down my cheek. He swept me in his arms, and we held each other for a long time. And we got back together again. Things went well for us after that. We continued with dance lessons about 3 times a week. And he also signed up to teach lessons at a local community center, and he asked me if I would be his partner in teaching the lessons. "I can't," I said. "I feel inadequate as an instructor." But he coaxed me. "But Esther, you're a beautiful dancer. Maybe you don't believe me, but may I remind you of the number of compliments that we have been receiving when we dance socially together?" I couldn't argue. It was true. Many people admired us dancing together. They even stopped us on the dance floor to say how nice we looked dancing together. And so, Vince further went on to assure me, "You know everything you need to know how to help teach me beginner lessons. You could offer to help the ladies, or you could just remain silent and allow me to teach if that's what you prefer. Whatever you're comfortable with." Okay, reluctantly I agreed. And the teaching sessions went along really smoothly. I became comfortable as his teaching assistant. The ladies appreciated my suggestions and encouragement. My weeks were filled, working full-time, taking dance lessons, teaching twice a week. The dancing seemed to energize me. It was so much fun. People really appreciated it. The women, the ladies really appreciated, and the couples appreciated all the help. And it was invigorating. It was very, very much fun. Anyway, the months flew by, and the lessons were over, and then the summer of 2000 was upon us. Well, one day, Vince and I got home to my apartment after work, and there were several messages on my phone. I was to call Selkirk immediately. And then the phone rang again, and it was my mom's brother from Toronto. Uh-oh. He came right out and told me, "Esther, your mother is dead." Oof. By the way, my mom was reinstated in 1993, and we reconnected that same year. I could do another video on that. So it was June of 2000. I had to go to Selkirk. My kids didn't want to attend the funeral, but my daughter did offer to pay for my flight. I could do an entire video about my mom's funeral in Selkirk, but for now I'll give you the short version. I stayed at my J.W. brother's and his wife's house, and Vince and I talked on the phone a few times. Looking back, that was one big mistake that I made. My brother's wife was the daughter of that strict elder who threatened me. When he found out that my mom came to visit me while she was disfellowshipped, and I was ordered to shun her. Oh. I would have been smarter to just get a hotel room while in Selkirk for Mom's funeral. I would have kept my little secret just a little bit safer if I did that. My brother and his wife, they knew exactly who I was talking to because it would have showed up on their phone bill. I didn't have a cell phone back then, back in 2000. Who knows? Maybe they recorded our conversation. Who knows? Whew. So, anyway, after the funeral and after I got back to Saskatoon, I was grieving over my mom's death. It was unexpected. Nobody knew she was sick. And of course, she was not supposed to die. Where was that much hoped for paradise? Long overdue. So much happened all at once, it seemed. It was just a matter of a few short weeks after that, the elders let me know that I had been disfellowshipped. I'll put the link below about my disfellowshipping. Oh, there was one part of me that was calm about it all, like a feeling of grace. But there was another part of me, likely that infamous cult persona, rearing its ugly head. And I blamed myself for my mom's death. Of course. I thought if I had moved back to Selkirk after my divorce to look after my mom, she would have told me about her health problems and I could have been in a better position to help her. Suddenly all that guilt that I had heaped on myself until that point flooded over me. I recalled how King David of the Bible was held responsible for all the bad things that happened in his family because of his sin with Bathsheba. 2 Samuel 12:9-15 says, "Why did you despise the word of the big J by doing what was bad in his eyes? Uriah the Hittite you struck down with the sword, blah, 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 blah." This is what the big J has said. "Here I am raising against you calamity out of your own house, because you have unquestionably treated the big J with disrespect by this thing. And also, the son himself, just born to you, will positively die." So, obviously I was being punished by God because of my affair with Vince. and my disobedience resulted in the death of my mother, my beloved mother, said my cult persona. I was so ashamed that I could not even discuss this with my therapist at first. When I told her about my mom's death, I sobbed in her office. And then I finally confessed my horrible guilt about being responsible for her death. Dr. Cat calmly informed me, Esther, a lot of people feel guilt around the death of a parent. However, I believe you are taking the death of your mom too personally. Not to mention, perhaps you are taking the Bible scripture too literally, is what she told me. Just because it may have happened a certain way in the Bible, it does not mean you caused your mom's death. Oh, I so needed to hear those words. What a relief. If it was true. I'm so grateful for Dr. Cat. I didn't know. I don't know what I would have done without her support when I was feeling so vulnerable. And I'm grateful for the dance group and Vince, who prayed with me. I'm grateful for my dancing. It's like my soul lined up all these great people so I could get through this traumatic event in one piece and not go crawling back to the kingdom hall that I despised so much. Oh, man. It wasn't that much later that my Uncle Pete died, my dad's brother. And Vince and I drove together to Selkirk to attend his funeral. That was a really good visit. And then that Christmas, we took a holiday together in Mexico, Mazatlan. That was wonderful. When summer rolled around again, we visited Vince's brother and their family in Summerland in the Okanagan of British Columbia. He told me an unsettling story on that trip, which concerned me greatly about the future of our relationship. Strike one. Hate to say this. He had this weird, codependent relationship with his son, which included deceiving his wife at the time. I didn't like that. If you can deceive your wife once, you can deceive again with the next lady, if that's what's already in you. Strike two. He wanted me to embrace his extreme Christian religion. I went to his church only once, and it was almost identical to the Jehovah's Witnesses. It was bizarre. It was like sitting in the Kingdom Hall that I just left. And I told him so. Of course, he didn't like that comparison to the Jehovah's Witnesses. Who could blame him? But that's how I felt, and I had to be honest about, look, I can't do this anymore. Strike three. He tried to get me away from a dance friend I made who had been inviting me to her meditation group. He tried to move me out of my apartment over to his side of town to get me away from her. He used some deception on me at that time. He also tried to find me an apartment on a farm somewhere with these Baptist family. And I mean, I would be isolated like crazy out there. I didn't have a vehicle at that time. I lost trust in him, and I decided to break up with him. I told him, "You're trying to make me cut off my toes to fit the shoes you are giving me." Nothing like a good dance illustration to get the point across. Ooh, he didn't like that either, but he got the message. It was really hard. But I broke up with him for good. I didn't want someone ever telling me again that I had to be a certain religion. I was not going there again. The only healthy thing left of our relationship was the dancing, I concluded. Can't build a relationship on one thing. I wanted more than that in an intimate relationship. Simple as that. As hard as that decision was, I knew. So before I end this video, I'd like to show a photo of me at a dance showcase in Vancouver in 2012. It's just a photo, because the video was such a poor quality, it's virtually unusable if I were to drop in a clip. My partner was obviously not Vince. He's from Saskatoon. He's not a boyfriend either. He was not my regular partner either. He's just a partner. In this picture, he's just a partner who danced at the same level as myself and danced a rumba with me. Okay, so here's one more. This is a short clip of me dancing in 2008 with my now sweet man, who I call Stan. Not his real name. This is an actual dance clip. This video clip is from a showcase with a 1920s theme. We're dressed in retro costumes and we're doing an old style of quickstep. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe and hit the notification bell. I'll see you next time.